The dust inside the Victorian manor on 4th Street hung like a shroud, thick enough to choke the moonlight filtering through boarded windows. And somewhere deep in the rotting basement, Ravi Santos lay chained to a rusted support beam, his ribs cracked and his expensive suit slick with his own blood. A 42-year-old kingpin whose name once made the city tremble, but whose power couldn't pick a master-grade padlock. His vision blurred as the darkness pressed in, every ragged breath a gamble against the silence. Miles away, in the concrete shadow of the interstate, Helena was fighting a different kind of war. A 32-year-old widow pulling her oversized coat tighter against a wind that felt like a blade, counting the few coins in her pocket while the memory of her husband's medical bills and the sound of an eviction notice being taped to a door kept time in her head. She didn't break into the abandoned house for heroics. She went because the storm was lethal, and the old Victorian was the only place left that hadn't been boarded up tight enough to keep out a ghost like her. She moved through the foyer with the practiced silence of the forgotten, her flashlight beam cutting through the rot until it landed on a pair of leather shoes, pristine, out of place, and stained crimson. When Helena followed the trail to the basement and saw the heavy iron links binding a man who looked like a fallen god, she should have turned and vanished back into the night. But a woman who has lost everything doesn't fear the dark, she recognizes it. As the beam hit Ravi's face, his eyes snapped open, sharp, calculating, and devoid of hope. He didn't beg for his life. Instead, he looked at the jagged piece of glass near Helena's boot and issued a request that left her frozen. If you have any mercy, use that glass to end this before they come back to finish it. The heavy iron links around Ravi's wrists weren't just metal, they were a death sentence. As Helena knelt in the damp filth of the basement, the smell of copper and mold filled her nose. She didn't have a fancy toolkit. All she had was a rusted screwdriver she'd found in an alley and a bent hair clip. Her fingers, stiff from the biting cold, shook as she poked at the high-security padlock. "The glass," Ravi rasped again, his voice cracking like dry wood. "Do it now. They're coming back." Helena didn't look up. "I've spent 3 years being pushed around by people who think they own the world," she whispered, her voice low and fierce. "I'm not starting my night by becoming a murderer just because you're having a bad day." Sud. The sound came from directly above them. A heavy boot hit the floorboards of the kitchen, then another. The old house groaned under the weight of men who didn't care about being quiet. They were confident. They thought their prisoner was still broken and alone. Helena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pushed the hair clip into the lock, feeling for the tiny pins inside. In her old life, she was a woman who fixed things: toasters, leaky sinks, her husband's broken spirit. Now she had to fix a lock that was designed to stay shut forever. "Left side," Ravi hissed, his eyes tracking the ceiling as the footsteps moved toward the basement door. "The 3rd pin is the tension point. Move fast or we both die in this dirt." She ignored the sweat dripping down her neck despite the freezing air. She felt the click. It was small, almost silent, but to her it sounded like a gunshot. The heavy bar of the padlock swung open. Ravi didn't waste a second. As the chains fell away with a muffled clink, he tried to stand, but his knees buckled. Helena caught him, his massive frame nearly crushing her smaller build. He smelled of expensive cologne, mixed with the metallic tang of blood. Above them, the basement door creaked open. A sliver of light from a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness of the stairs. "Check the chains," a rough voice ordered from the top of the steps. "If he's still breathing, put one in his head and let's get out of this dump." Helena gripped Ravi's arm, pulling it over her shoulder. She knew this house better than the men upstairs. She had spent an hour scouting every corner before she decided it was safe enough to sleep in. She knew about the coal chute in the back corner, a narrow, soot-stained tunnel that led out to the frozen alleyway. "Can you crawl?" she breathed into his ear. Ravi looked at the stairs, then back at her. The calculating look was back, replacing the pain. He saw the coal chute, then looked at the woman who had just defied a kingpin's order to save his life.
"Lead the way, ghost," he whispered. They slipped into the shadows just as the first heavy foot hit the basement stairs. Behind them, the iron chains lay empty on the floor, a cold reminder of the life Helena was about to leave behind and the dangerous world she was about to enter.
The coal chute was a tight squeeze, smelling of old soot and frozen dirt. Helena slid out first, landing in the crusty snow of the narrow alleyway. She reached back and helped Ravi. He moved like a man made of glass, his face pale and his jaw set tight against the pane. The cold air hit them like a physical punch, but there was no time to shiver. From inside the house, a muffled shout rang out. The men had found the empty chains. "This way," Helena whispered. She didn't head for the main street where the bright city lights lived. Instead, she turned toward a gap between two brick buildings that looked too small for a person to fit through. Ravi stumbled, his expensive shoes slipping on a patch of black ice. "The street," he wheezed, glancing toward the glow of the distant traffic. "I have people, if I can get to a phone." "If you go to the street, you're a target," Helena interrupted, her voice steady and sharp. "Those black SUVs are already circling the block. I've watched them for 20 minutes. They aren't looking for a man in an alley. They're looking for a man on a corner." She led him through a maze of invisible paths. They climbed over a sagging chain-link fence and moved through the hollowed-out shell of an old warehouse. This was Helena's world, a map of shortcuts and hiding spots that the rest of the city ignored. To the wealthy, these were just piles of trash and broken concrete. To Helena, they were a shield. As they crouched behind a rusted dumpster, a large black SUV crawled slowly past the mouth of the alley. Its tinted windows were rolled down just an inch, and the low hum of its engine sounded like a growling beast. The headlights cut through the falling snow, searching for anything out of place. Ravi watched the vehicle go by, his eyes dark. He looked at Helena, really looking at her for the first time. She was covered in soot, her oversized coat was torn, and her breath came out in small white puffs. She looked like a ghost, but she was the only thing keeping him in the land of the living. "You're a shadow," Ravi murmured, his voice showing a glimmer of respect. "In this city, being a shadow is the only way to stay whole," she replied. She checked the street again. The SUV had turned the corner. She knew a spot 3 blocks away, an old basement under a laundromat the owner forgot to lock years ago. It was dry, it was hidden, and most importantly, it was a place where no one would ever think to look for a kingpin. "Keep your head down and step where I step," she ordered. "We have to disappear before the sun comes up." She moved forward into the dark, and for the first time in a long time, Ravi Santos followed someone else's lead. The sanctuary was a small, windowless room hidden beneath the floor of a closed-down laundromat. It smelled of bleach and old concrete, but it was dry and warm. Helena kicked aside a pile of blankets to reveal a clean space on the floor. She helped Ravi sit down, his back leaning against the humming water pipes. "Stay still," she ordered, her voice firm. Up close, the damage was worse than she thought. A deep, jagged cut ran along his side, where a piece of metal had caught him during the struggle. His shirt was soaked through with dark, sticky blood. He was losing strength fast, and the gray color of his skin was a warning Helena couldn't ignore. "I have a kit," she said, pulling a plastic box from behind a loose brick. "I keep it for the people on the streets who can't go to the hospital. It's not much, but it has to be enough." Ravi looked at the small bottle of rubbing alcohol and the needle and thread she pulled out. He let out a short, pained laugh. "You're going to stitch me up with a sewing kit, ghost?" "I've fixed worse things than you," Helena snapped, though her heart was racing. She soaked a clean rag in alcohol. "The men who did this to you are still out there. If you want to live long enough to find them, you need to be quiet and let me work." She didn't wait for his permission. As she cleaned the wound, Ravi's jaw clamped shut so hard his teeth groaned. He didn't scream, but his fingers dug into the concrete floor until his knuckles turned white. Helena moved with quick, steady hands.
She had learned how to be careful back when she was taking care of her husband, back when every penny mattered, and a trip to the doctor was an impossible dream. The room was silent except for the steady drip-drip of a leaky valve and Ravi's heavy breathing. Helena felt the weight of the moment. She was a widow who owned nothing, yet right now the life of one of the most powerful men in the city was held together by her stitches. "Why?" Ravi asked suddenly, his voice a low rasp as she tied the final knot. Helena stopped, her hands hovering over his side. "Why what?" Ravi packed his supplies away, his face unreadable. "Because I'm tired of watching things break," she said, looking him in the eye. "And because even a man like you shouldn't have to die in a basement alone." Ravi didn't answer. He looked at the rough, neat stitches in his side, then back at the woman in the oversized coat. For the first time, the cold, calculating look in his eyes softened into something else, something that looked almost like gratitude. But before he could speak, a faint vibration shook the floor. A heavy vehicle had stopped directly above them.
The vibration wasn't an enemy, it was a rescue. Within minutes, the laundromat above was filled with the sound of heavy doors slamming and urgent, low voices. A group of men in dark suits descended into the basement. They moved with a military precision that made Helena feel smaller than ever. They didn't look like the thugs from the abandoned house. These men were professionals. "Sir," one of them said, bowing his head slightly as he reached for Ravi. Ravi didn't move yet. He pointed a steady finger at Helena. "She comes with us. Treat her like she's made of gold." Before Helena could protest, she was swept up in the movement. She was led out of her quiet sanctuary and into the back of a black car that smelled of new leather and expensive air. They drove through the city, bypassing the slums and the alleyways she knew, heading straight for the skyline, where the buildings were made of glass and light. They arrived at a penthouse that took up the entire top floor of a skyscraper. It was a world of marble floors, soft music, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked down on the clouds. "Take her to the guest suite," Ravi ordered, his voice getting stronger now that he was back in his kingdom. "Get her whatever she needs." Helena was led to a room larger than any house she had ever lived in. A woman in a uniform waiting there handed her a robe made of silk so soft it felt like water. Helena looked at her old, oversized coat, stained with Ravi's blood and city soot, lying on the marble floor. It looked like a piece of trash in a museum. She showered, scrubbing the grit of the streets from her skin until it turned pink. She dressed in the fine clothes they provided, but when she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. The silk felt heavy, like a disguise. She walked to the bedroom door and turned the handle, wanting to find Ravi and tell him she was leaving. The handle didn't budge. She tried again, harder this time. There was no keyhole on her side, only a smooth electronic pad that glowed a soft, mocking red. Helena stepped back, her heart sinking. She looked out at the beautiful view of the city, realizing she was hundreds of feet above the streets she understood. In the basement, she had been a ghost who could vanish into the night. Here, she was a bird in a cage made of diamonds. The clothes were better and the air was warmer, but as the silence of the penthouse settled around her, Helena realized a terrifying truth. Ravi hadn't just rescued her from the cold, he had traded her iron chains for ones made of velvet, and these locks worked both ways. She wasn't his savior anymore, she was his prisoner. A week passed, and the penthouse felt more like a museum than a home. Ravi recovered quickly. His strength returned with every expensive meal and every visit from his private doctors. He no longer looked like the broken man from the basement. Now he wore custom-made suits and spent his hours on the phone, his voice cold and commanding as he rebuilt his empire. One evening, he called Helena into his massive office. The room was filled with the scent of old books and leather. Ravi stood by the window, looking down at the city lights like they belonged to him. On his desk sat a velvet box. "You saved my life, Helena," he said without turning around. In my world, a debt like that is never forgotten. Open it." Helena opened the box. Inside was a diamond necklace that sparkled so brightly it made her eyes ache. It was worth more than the house she had lost 3 years ago. It was worth more than her husband's life had been to the hospital. "I've had my lawyer set up an account for you," Ravi continued, finally turning to face her. "You will never have to worry about a roof over your head or a cold wind again. You'll have a driver, a wardrobe, and anything else you desire. You're my good luck charm now. As long as you are under my protection, nothing can touch you." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile a man gives to a prized horse or a rare painting. Helena looked at the diamonds, then back at Ravi. She didn't feel lucky. She felt a cold knot tightening in her stomach. "A good luck charm?" she asked, her voice quiet. "The men who tried to kill me believe I survived because of a miracle," Ravi said, leaning against his desk. "But I know it was you. You're the ghost that brought me back. I want you here, where I can see you." Helena realized then that he wasn't offering her a partnership. He wasn't even offering her a friendship. He was offering to buy her silence and her presence. He wanted to keep her in this glass tower like a trophy, a reminder of the night he almost lost everything. She thought about the way she had picked that lock in the basement. She thought about the way she had navigated the city's invisible paths to keep him safe. She had used her brain, her courage, and her strength. But to Ravi, she was just a lucky object he had found in the dark. "Is this a gift, Ravi?" she asked, looking him straight in the eyes. "Or is it just a different kind of chain?" Ravi's smile faded, replaced with a look of confusion. He wasn't used to people questioning his generosity. "It's security, Helena. Isn't that what you wanted?" "I wanted to be seen," she whispered, leaving the necklace on the desk. As she walked out of the office, she could feel his watchful eyes on her back. She was living in luxury, but she had never felt more invisible. To Ravi Santos, she was a pet, and she knew that in his world, when a pet stopped being lucky, it was quickly forgotten. The gala was a sea of sparkling dresses and sharp tuxedos. Ravi called it a victory party, a way to show the city he was back in control. Helena stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, wearing a dress of midnight blue that cost more than her husband's old truck. She felt like an imposter. To the people laughing and clinking glasses, she was just a quiet girl on Ravi's arm, a mystery they didn't care to solve. Ravi moved through the crowd like a shark, shaking hands and rebuilding alliances. He kept glancing back at Helena, flashing that confident smile that told the world she was his lucky charm. But Helena wasn't looking at the flowers or the expensive art. She was looking at the people. Being homeless had taught Helena how to watch. When you live on the streets, you learn to read a person's walk or the way they look around a corner before they ever speak. You learn who is dangerous and who is just a bully. "Smile, Helena," Ravi whispered, leaning in close as they stood near a group of his top advisors. "These are my most trusted friends. They helped me find my way back." Helena tried to smile, but her breath caught in her throat. Standing just a few feet away, sipping a glass of champagne, was a man with a thin scar running through his eyebrow. He was laughing at a joke, looking perfectly comfortable in his expensive suit. Helena's memory flashed back to the basement. She remembered the sliver of light from the flashlight. She remembered the rough voice ordering the other men to check the chains and put one in his head. It was him. The man with the star hadn't been a stranger. He had been the one leading the executioners. The room seemed to tilt. The music became a dull roar in her ears. The traitor wasn't hiding in the shadows of the city. He was standing right here, in the inner circle, pretending to be a friend. He was the poison in the ranks. As he felt her gaze, the man with the scar turned. His eyes met Helena's. For a split second, his smile faltered. He didn't recognize her in the silk dress and the jewels, not yet, but he saw the terror in her eyes. He saw that she was looking at him the way a person looks at a ghost. Helena looked at Ravi, who was busy talking about business. He was so sure of his power, so sure that he was safe in this glass palace. He didn't realize that the person who had tried to kill him was close enough to touch him.
She felt the old instinct to run. She could slip out the back door, shed the silk dress, and become a ghost in the alleys again. But then she looked at Ravi's stitches, the ones she had sewn with her own hands. If she ran, he would be dead before morning. Helena realized she couldn't just be a lucky charm anymore. She had to be a witness. She reached out and gripped Ravi's arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Ravi," she breathed, her voice trembling but certain. "We need to talk, right now."
Ravi led Helena away from the noise of the party and into a small, private library. The heavy oak door shut, cutting off the sound of the violins. He looked frustrated, his hand smoothing over his silk tie. "Helena, what is it?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I'm in the middle of a very important night. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the crowd, my driver can take you back to your room." "The man with the scar," Helena said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He was there, Ravi, in the basement. He was the one who told the others to kill you." Ravi froze. For a second, the mask of the powerful kingpin slipped, showing the shock underneath. He knew exactly who she was talking about. Marcus, his oldest friend and most trusted soldier. He looked at the closed door, then back at Helena, his eyes narrowing. "Are you sure?" he hissed. "That is a very dangerous thing to say. If you are wrong, you are ruining a man's life." "I am a ghost, Ravi," Helena replied, stepping closer. "I've spent 3 years watching people from the shadows. I don't forget faces, especially not the face of a man who was about to commit a murder. He's the reason you were in those chains, and right now, he's waiting for another chance." Ravi paced the room, his mind racing. He realized that Helena wasn't just his lucky charm. She was his eyes and ears in a world where he had grown too comfortable. He turned back to her, reaching for the velvet box on the desk, the diamond necklace she had rejected before. "I'll double the money. I'll give you whatever jewels you want. Just tell my security team everything you saw." Helena didn't look at the diamonds. She pushed the box away. "I don't want your stones, Ravi, and I don't want to be your pet anymore. If I'm going to help you survive this, the price has changed." Ravi paused, his eyes flickering with surprise. "What do you want then?" "I want a life that belongs to me," she said firmly. "I want a deed to a house, not a penthouse you can lock me in, but a real home with my name on the paper. I want a legal identity, a clean record, and a way to stand on my own 2 feet. I want to stop being a ghost." Ravi looked at her, really seeing her for the first time. She wasn't begging, she was negotiating. She had seen the weakness in his empire, and she was using the only leverage she had to buy her freedom. She was playing his game, and she was winning. He let out a slow, cold breath. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Helena. You know that if I give you those things, you can leave whenever you want. I won't be able to keep you." "That's the point," Helena said. "I want to stay because I choose to, not because I'm a prisoner." Ravi nodded slowly. He reached into his desk and pulled out a pen. "Fine. You give me the evidence I need to handle Marcus, and the house is yours. You'll have a name again." Helena felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had traded her silence for a future. Now she just had to stay alive long enough to live in it. The agreement was signed, but the ink wasn't even dry before the power in the penthouse cut out. The grand chandeliers flickered and died, plunging the library into a thick, suffocating darkness. The only light came from the city skyline outside, casting long, jagged shadows across the marble floor. "It's happening," Helena whispered. Ravi reached for the drawer where he kept his weapon, but a heavy thud sounded against the library door. The electronic lock hissed. Someone had used a master override. Marcus stepped into the room, his scar glowing pale in the moonlight. He wasn't alone. 2 men with silenced pistols followed him, their movements cold and precise. "You should have died in that basement, Ravi," Marcus said, his voice smooth and empty. "It would have been cleaner. Now I have to get my hands dirty in this beautiful office." Ravi stood tall, even though his side was still tender from the stitches. "I trusted you, Marcus. I gave you everything." "You grew soft," Marcus countered, raising his weapon.
And then you let a street rat into your house to play Lucky Charm. That was your final mistake. He didn't see Helena. She had already moved. While they were talking, she had slipped into the blind spots of the room, the corners where the shadows were deepest. To Marcus, she was just a helpless girl. He didn't realize that Helena had survived for years by knowing exactly how to disappear when the world turned dangerous. As Marcus leveled his gun at Ravi, Helena grabbed a heavy bronze statue from a side table. She didn't scream, she didn't make a sound. She used the silence of the city she knew so well. She threw the heavy object at the floor-to-ceiling window behind Marcus. The glass didn't break. It was bulletproof, but the loud crack and the sudden vibration made the gunmen flinch. For 1 second, they turned their heads toward the sound. That second was all Helena needed. She lunged forward and kicked a heavy rolling chair into the legs of the first gunman, sent him stumbling into the second. At the same time, she slammed the light switch for the emergency backup. A blinding, strobing red light filled the room, disorienting the attackers. "Now, Ravi!" she yelled. Ravi moved with the speed of a man who had reclaimed his throne. He tackled Marcus, the two of them crashing into the desk. Helena didn't stick around to watch the fight. She knew the layout of the penthouse better than anyone because she had spent her days looking for exits. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and pulled the pin, filling the hallway with a thick white cloud of chemicals just as more of Marcus's men tried to enter. In the confusion and the blinding fog, Marcus's team lost their edge. They were used to fighting people who stood still and shot back. They weren't prepared for a ghost who used the environment as a weapon. By the time Ravi's loyal security team arrived, Marcus was pinned to the floor and the room was a wreck of white powder and broken furniture. Ravi stood over the traitor, breathing hard. He looked at Helena, who was standing in the corner, her midnight blue dress torn and her hair falling out of its neat bun. She looked like the survivor from the basement again. "You saved me twice," Ravi said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saved my future," Helena corrected him, her eyes steady. "Now make sure the locks on that house you promised me are the best in the world."
The morning sun rose over the city, turning the glass skyscrapers into pillars of gold. Down on a quiet street far away from the penthouse, Helena stood in front of a small, sturdy house with a wide front porch. It wasn't a palace, and it didn't have marble floors, but as she slid the key into the lock, she felt a thrill that no diamond necklace could ever provide. The deed in her pocket was real. The name on the paper was hers. Ravi stood by his black SUV at the curb, watching her. He looked different now. The coldness in his eyes hadn't vanished. He was still a kingpin, after all. But the way he looked at Helena had changed. He no longer saw a lucky charm or a pet. He saw the woman who had navigated the shadows to save his life twice. "The men who followed Marcus are gone," Ravi said, stepping toward the porch. "My empire is quiet again. But it's a different kind of quiet. I've spent my whole life thinking power was about who you could chain down. You showed me that real power is knowing who you can trust to stand beside you." Helena turned to him, the house key tight in her hand. "And what will you do now, Ravi?" "I'm cleaning the house," he said, and for the first time he sounded like a man with a purpose beyond just surviving. "No more traitors, no more looking over my shoulder. And I've made sure the city knows your name, Helena, not as a ghost, but as the woman who is under the protection of the Santos family, though I think they're more afraid of you than they are of me." He was right. Word had spread through the underworld about the widow who had outsmarted a team of professional hitmen with nothing but her wits and a fire extinguisher. People didn't look through her anymore. When she walked down the street to buy groceries, the shadows seemed to move out of her way. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a legend. Ravi reached into his coat and pulled out a small, simple cell phone. "If you ever need anything, if the world tries to turn you back into a ghost, you press one button. I'll be there." Helena took the phone, but she knew she wouldn't need it.
She had learned how to pick locks, how to stitch wounds, and how to fight in the dark. She had built her own armor. "Thank you, Ravi, for the house, and for finally seeing me." Ravi nodded, a look of genuine respect on his face. He got back into his car and drove away, returning to his world of high-stakes power. Helena stepped inside her new home. The air was fresh, and the rooms were filled with light. She looked at her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her face was no longer gaunt or tired. Her eyes were sharp and clear. She wasn't a widow waiting for the end anymore. She was Helena, the woman who had walked through the fire and come out stronger on the other side. As she closed the door and locked it, using the high-security deadbolt she had picked out herself, she finally let out a long, peaceful breath. The storm was over. She was home.